All right.
Good afternoon and welcome to Crew Classé at Home Volume 6. We have some very special guests joining us today, all of whom I consider family. This relationship we've had with them has lasted north of 20 years. To give you a quick background about who we are, I'm Adam Halpern, and my family, Halpern Enterprises, has been importing fine wine since the early 1950s in Canada. I'd like to talk about a few things. Firstly, from all of us at the Halpern team, from every panelist here, we hope everyone from wherever you are safe and sound. And through these difficult times, I hope we could bring you a bright spot in your day. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. When my team approached me about a month and a half ago with the idea of Crew Classé, I loved the idea. Given the circumstances that we're in right now, the sense of virtual community was quite important. With the connections we have and the contacts and relationships, it was clear that we'd be able to do something great. And here we are today with two of our great friends and one of our greatest relationships. And to start it all off, I'm going to introduce Sheila Flaherty, who's one of our lead wine enthusiasts at Halpern, and she's going to introduce our two special panelists. Sheila.
Perfect. I am very, very excited, and thank you both for joining us today. So I want to introduce both Paolo and Luca De Marchi. Luca De Marchi runs Propieta Sperino in alto-piedmont, and Paolo De Marchi, Isole and Olena in Tuscany. We'll tell you much more about, but I'm very, very excited to have you both here. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm just going to jump in a little bit with history. I mean, your family is originally from Lesona, but Paolo, it was in the 1950s, I believe, Isole and Olena were purchased, correct?
Yes, my father bought Isole and Olena in 1956.
So what was the reason for the move to Tuscany then?
He knew the old owners, and they wanted to sell the property.
Okay.
And my father was a little disappointed because in the family, after World War II, they didn't want to go on with the production at Sperino, which he wanted.
That was your family that didn't want to continue at Sperino?
My father's siblings.
Okay.
When they were back from war, my grandfather had passed away when the three kids were at war, and the other two didn't want to go on, and my father wanted to go on because he was very passionate, but two against one, and the production was set aside. And my father had the possibility to buy from these people he knew. One of them was a textile industrial man from Biella, so was connected with the family. The old owners of Isole and Olena, and he decided to buy. So
what happened in the meantime with Sperino then? So that window where he moved to Tuscany, but before you two went back and retook over the property.
My grandmother was still living there. We used to spend our summer vacations there. After the war, my parents moved from the north of Piemonte to Torino. I really got my passion there, but the land was basically abandoned. There was still a small vineyard which we were running until the late 60s. So I did harvest from the old vineyards, but then the land was leased out to another owner in Lesona, and everything was basically abandoned. But it has remained my original dream for making wine, Lesona.
So what year was it then that the two of you were able to repurchase the property or get back there?
I bought back from the family in 1999, and I started replanting in the year 2000.
And Luca, is that when you started?
Well, yes. Well, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, so yes, that's. I think it's quite unusual the way I got into wine, and when Paolo decided to restart, which I always find quite fascinating. It shows that winemaking has something special inside, because when Paolo decided to restart, somehow he was thinking to a project that would survive him somehow. And none of his kids were keen to be involved in wine business. If you were asking me at the time if I would be interested in wine, my answer would have been no, which is quite funny. So, at the time I was in Torino studying at the university. I was into medieval literature, so not really winemaking, honestly. Partially useless, in fact, but very interesting. And at the time, it's quite strange to think what was year 2000 here in alto-piedmont, because there was no vineyards anymore, but the textile industry was very strong, and so there was zero unemployment. And my father decided to restart, but then nobody was here to work the vineyards. And I was living nearby in Torino, and so I started coming over. And slowly I got passionate about the place. I always think that I got into wine because of the historical side of alto-piedmont mostly. So this is what really has interested me. There is the old house has a beautiful library where we have more than 100 years of vintages reporting, and it's quite impressive, especially because I was more into history at the time. So I really loved that. I was kind of feeling alto-piedmont it's been the leading wine area of Italy until the end of the 19th century. And it's been the leading area of Italy for probably more than 300 years. And nobody knew anything. And I felt it was totally unfair through the previous generations. And so that's probably what made me decide to join my father's adventure, and still in his dream, by the way, because now I'm here and he's still stuck in Tuscany. But yes.
Luca, how deep is that library at Sperino? I haven't been lucky enough to come visit yet. I was lucky to visit your father briefly last year, but tell me about that library.
It is fascinating. Again, I'm probably, because of my personality, I like much more the past than the present, probably. I don't know, but I love to get lost into that library. And especially these days, we are living in, where we are in northern Italy. The situation, it's quite surreal. I mean, everything's like frozen, and it's not an easy moment, probably. And now I love to spend my time in the library. It's impressive. Sperino, the ancestral, we are related to, the one that has founded the property. He was a very scientific oriented man. He was a medicine. He was one of the members of the Royal Academy for Science. He was a director of the medical university in Torino. So he was very much scientific oriented. And he was in the front line of researches for phylloxera, rootstocks, American rootstocks. And it's quite funny to read that now, because somehow you see, I'm feeling like they were facing in the mid-19th century a possible total destruction of the world, the way they were used to. And so they had to face again this invisible, incredibly small enemy, like we are doing these days. And slowly they have kind of learned how to survive despite of phylloxera, and they have learned that sometimes you cannot win, but you have to adapt to the new situation. And so it's so fascinating to see, all these going through. I mean, it's quite an amazing place, that library. Yeah.
So cool.
We were out of topic probably, but
No,
that's kind of.
No, Luca.
No,
I believe I believe it would be so great sometimes to be able to make a graft here and change.
Not for the next couple of decades, at least. I hope.
So, and Paolo, tell us, was the old label of Lessona, was that an inspiration for the current Ceparello label?
A lot of
yes, of course.
Yeah.
It's there's similarity because, in fact, I always dreamed
it's
of
exactly
Lessona,
the same label, Paolo.
But no,
you stole the label.
No,
it's not.
No.
There are no similarity. That's
No.
the Lessona label. Okay, there was not written Ceparello.
It is not a stealing when it is something abandoned, and when basically the owner of that label tells you, don't even think of making Lessona again. So I wanted to have a strong connection with the past, and I decided to use that label for Ceparello. And then we don't know how things change. And when I finally got able to buy the property with Luca, and we started to produce, the label was a problem. So we wanted to design a label which would remind of the old label of Lessona, but I could not steal back from Isole and Olena the label of Ceparello for Lessona. So yes, it is the same family of design, yes. But it's a good connection in two companies, which are now different companies, but same family.
So the one thing I wanted to ask you about, because I remember the last time I was there, you telling me about this, and it's fascinating. At Isole and Olena, the lands were tended by relatively absent sharecroppers. Is that correct?
Not completely. Yes, it is all in the hands of the sharecroppers, but where the landowners who were absent.
Can you explain, for those that aren't familiar, sharecropping and what that was in Tuscany?
Yes. I try to be not too long because this is something which fascinates me, and I believe that you cannot fully understand what has been the evolution of Chianti if you don't understand that we are all coming, the producers today, with the Super Tuscan, with all what has happened in modern Tuscan, in fact, if we do not go to the sudden collapse of the old production structure and social structure of the region. So the properties were big ones, all the noble families, all the families who owned a lot of land. The land was divided into units called the podere. So you see labels now, podere, whatever. Podere was the name of the unit given to a sharecropping family, the size that the family could cultivate. So the peasants, the whole family living together in a patriarchal organization, and they were mixed farming their land, doing the maximum use of land. There was no mechanization. So what they created was something really fascinating, because they were actually multiplying 1 hectare into many hectares, because they had the field crops. They had the wheat, the vines that are growing on trees, not to disturb the wheat, in between olives, and then the fruit trees. When seeding the wheat, they were seeding clover. So in June, after cut the wheat, they had green grass for the animals. So it was a full cycle agriculture for the food production for the family. And the product was divided a little more than 50% for the sharecropping family, and a little less than 50% to the owner, who was probably living in Florence, Siena, Rome. And they were using the estate for summer vacations, for parties, for hunting. So at that time, until mid of the 60s, lived on the estate about 120, 130 people producing their own food. And there was a primary school in the village of Olena. There was a priest. Was it a village? I don't know. In a village, you might need one little store. No, because they were producing all what they needed. It was a hamlet of people. They were almost all related one with the other, and they were living with very, very little contact with the world outside until mid of the 60s. And then I think television was more impacted than internet today, because television finally showed these people what the world was 20 kilometers away. And in the early 60s, money in Italy was flowing. It was we called the golden 60s, the fabulous 60s. And all of a sudden,
very isolated in these communities.
They were very isolated. Huh. And the young generation, teenagers living in a patriarchal family, and they watch TV and they see the Beatles, they see the miniskirt, they see the sexual revolution, and they left. In 5 years at the estate of Isole and Olena, from 130 people, only 14 people were left. This was the dramatic change, and the land, Chianti really got the risk of being abandoned. What is fun is that at the same time, the appellation rules have been put in place. And the fact is that they wrote the first appellation rules looking back to the wine produced by the sharecroppers, which was a wine they needed to use locally. And so many consequences of that. And since the new appellation, in 5 years, Europe made a program to replant and reorganize, modernize Chianti. 8,000 hectares of vineyards have been planted without much thinking and experimentation. So all the consequences we might talk later, you have to go back to this very intense, interesting, but too quick modernization.
So, I mean, you said obviously there was maybe 120 people living there at the time. What's the status of Isole and Olena now? Obviously, you're there with the family, but do they still function as villages? Are there still people that live in Olena, or?
So in Olena, there are actually living 2 people full time, and they are not. It's a ghost village from the sharecropping times. They are not involved in the production. One is an artisan who we use him to repair windows, to paint things. He's an artisan, and the other one is a retired man who lives. Rents the house in Olena since over 40 years. And Isole now has more people than Olena, because I have a part of my full-time workers living at Isole. All the farming operation, the winery, the office is at Isole.
We have some people watching that are asking if they can move to Olena, if that's okay then.
Why? Sure. Why not? I give them a little piece of land to make an organic vegetable garden. Why not?
Adam, we can move the offices and do a little satellite.
After seeing it this last summer, I was ready to move in.
It is beautiful, but now with not much movement and not many cars, it's unbelievable how nature is taking her place. Because the other morning there was a couple of deers in our backyard here, and there are so many birds, eagles. It's unbelievable how things change without cars, without too many people around.
So Paolo, one thing I know you and I discussed this last summer, but something I feel like our viewers would be interested. You know, given the past, I don't know, 20 years or so, 30 years, Super Tuscans have been, you know, a large play in Italy, and you decided to go the route of 100% Sangiovese and make Ciparello. So tell me what the decision was to continue doing what you're doing, and also the Chianti Classico Grand Selezione, why you decided to go that route instead of jumping like, you know, many of your other counterparts that did go that way.
Well, two different things. So I start from Ceparello, which is the one which has more history on it. So I am responsible of production at Isole and Olena since 1976, when I was fresh from university. I got here, and the situation of those vineyards planted 10 years ago to 5 years, 10 years before and 5 years before, in those 5 years lapse of time, the situation was quite difficult. The first appellation rules required a huge amount of white grapes to be blended into the Chianti. 20% minimum to a 30%. By the way, when we talk about percent, we should not forget we are not talking about actual grapes, but we talk about the number of vines. So the situation when I came here was a 30% white grapes, Trebbiano, Toscano, and Malvasia, 30% vines. And in vineyards, which is not really cared for quality, because the general idea was we are in a beautiful area, quality is a gift. When you let these vines produce, from 30% of Trebbiano and Malvasia, you get probably 50% of grapes. You want to make a red wine. So I was lucky enough to study at the university, and I thought that I knew that it was easier to make a red wine from red grapes rather than from white grapes. So my first step was to take a part of the white grapes and keep them aside and not blending. But it was not enough. So I decided to select the best Sangiovese from the vineyards. So literally walking before the harvest every single row and tagging the vines which I thought that they were good quality. This is like a mass selection. You were
tagging every single vine.
The vines which I liked, every single vine tagged.
Yeah.
The individuals. And then the next year again, and the next year again. And then I told my people at harvest time, do not harvest the vines which are tagged, because I want to harvest them separate. I wanted to make a wine from the very best individuals and to have a kind of a light, of a target to follow. The idea of what I could do if all my grapes had the same quality of those best vines. So I had no idea to make a wine from pure Sangiovese and to bottle it. It was just to understand the potential of my vineyards, starting from, things were so complicated, and my reaction was, there are too many questions. Let us put first things first. So what is the most important variety is Sangiovese. Let us understand the Sangiovese. In order to understand Sangiovese, I have to simplify the question and work on it. Our vineyards were literally like a crowd asking too many questions at the same time, because the vineyards needed answers. But if the questions come at the same time, we are not able to answer. So I said, okay, the first question, Sangiovese, and I selected the best. I made the wine from those best grapes. And then I realized that the wine was interesting. And in 1980, I decided to bottle it as Ceparello. But I continued to check the vineyards and to tag the vines. So in 1987, when I finally planted my first vineyard, the one which I planted following my ideas, I didn't know where to buy good Sangiovese, and I decided to plant rootstocks and to graft all the buds from the vines which had the most tags. So I had been doing that by then 10 years of tagging, and the vines which may be 1 or 2 tags. So special vintages where that vine was happy, but other vines which had 5 or more tags. And I decided to take from the wood, the buds, to graft from those vines and to plant in that new vineyard. So it was one vineyard, same age, same rootstock, same site, but different individual grafted. Was putting most condition even, so the differences would have been mostly genetical differences. From that vineyard, I made the second step. I selected the best. I gave to my nursery, I multiplied each individual into many vines, and I have another vineyards where each row comes actually from one individual vine. It is the step between the clonal selection, between the master selection and clonal selection. But I had enough grapes from one row, from this originally the same one individual, to make a little bit of wine. And it was extremely interesting. The quality was there, but quality is not only one quality. Quality is also complexity. So I immediately realized that simplifying the genetic to one single clone, you get the quality because the wine is more intense, more expressive, more structured, but you reduce the complexity of the wine. I like to think of the mountains. I love the Matterhorn. It's the ideal mountain, the pyramid, which stands alone, but there's nothing to compare the Matterhorn like the beauty of the Alps, where we have Mont Blanc, where we have the Dolomites, where we have. I wanted my wine to be more like a range of mountains rather than one beautiful mountain. And so it is very funny because from confusion to master selection to clonal selection, and then back to clonal selection in a Massal vineyard. Because now I know what I use, but I tend to plant the most number of clones in one vineyard. We just have control of what we use. Talking too much.
No, it's amazing. How does vine density play into this? Because you're known for having quite dense vines, correct?
Yes, it was probably one. Probably really in the small group, I don't want to say the first one, but in the small group of the first estates who started to increase the density of plantation. So in my first vineyard, there were a lot of things going on. And the density of plantation is, in my opinion, very important. I have different ideas, but we should talk 2 hours about this. But yes, we are one of the most intensely planted vineyards in Chianti. At least one of the early dense vineyard estates. You know, it is very, very usual to get asked as a winner, what is your yield per hectare? And this is one question, but it doesn't really give the real answer. We answer, okay, so many kilos or so many liters, but how many vines give that yield? It is different to have 10,000 kilos with 10,000 vines is 1 kilo per vine. With 1,000 vines is 10 kilos per vines. With 1 vine is 10,000 kilos per vine. You make a big pergola. So the key of how many vines per hectare means how many kilos per vine do you want to produce. And as there's the vine and there's the canopy, basically now I go back to the square meters of canopy to produce 1 kilo of grapes. I think this is the real key. It's a little more complicated concept. I don't expect the consumer to ask this question, but
we need to do a masterclass with you on that.
No, I need people to come and we spend some time in the vineyards in September and it will be so clear.
So this question, I'm going to let Luca answer this first. It's in terms of viticultural practices. Luca, so we'll start with you in Piemonte.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about how you've seen climate change alter your practices?
Yes. We restarted in 2000. So it's just 20 years ago, which is not that much in wine business. We are quite new in the area, I would say. Definitely there is a global warming. This is something we have seen in the average temperatures slowly increasing year after year. And somehow we are in a lucky condition at the moment because being far north, being in the foothill of the Alps, actually a little warming up helps. So that's something that, if I go back to the old books, to the to the 19th century, I would say that, excuse me, probably top quality vintages were maybe 3, 4 out of 10. Then it was sometimes very difficult to get to full maturity of the grapes at the time. And today, I would say that probably in the entire Piemonte, maybe southern Piemonte, Langhe is a little too warm sometimes, but I would say that Piemonte is probably facing 6 to 8 very good vintages out of 10. So that's a big change, and actually not so bad at the moment. I mean, not for the entire world, but at least for Alto Piemonte. Also, we have to learn, there are new challenges, of course. So one of the reasons why the area was abandoned was also because it's very difficult to produce here, both because of soils, which are very unique and very, very strange, but also because of climate conditions. It might be cold, and you might have spring frost, and you might have hail. Hail is really an issue being so close to the mountains. So you always have some warm air coming from the plain and the cold air coming from the mountains, and this delivers hail. What I have seen with the global warming actually is that hail is happening more and more often. So this is a big challenge. We are just starting to protect the vineyards with nets, which seem to work very well. And plus, they also make so that the clusters will stay a bit more in a shadow condition, which is also helping because of global warming. One of the challenges would be not to get to over-ripening, which is not what you want in a great Nebbiolo in this area, which should be known for the finesse, for the elegance, and not for the big weight. So I don't know. I think we still have to see where the global warming will lead us.
And what about in Tuscany, Paolo? Have you seen over the last few decades shifts in your viticulture as a result of it?
Yes, I think we see it as quite important. We have, well, we think of heat in summertime, but I think what is really critical is that we do not have a real winter anymore. Very short real dormancy, and bud breaking is at least 3 weeks, but sometimes 4 weeks earlier than my memory in the 70s and early 80s. So we are facing problems which we never had, like spring frost, because Sangiovese is a fairly late bud break. Used to be around this time, around the 20th of April. And now is the end of March, last week of March. But we easily have a cold shot at the end of March, early April, mid-April, even now. So we have a very mild winter. You have maybe couple of weeks of very warm weather. The vines decide to wake up, and then you have 3 days which are eventually below zero in the morning. So frost is becoming a problem, and we are not really organized to fight frost. The second challenge is with the early bud break, everything gets a little earlier. So the ripeness gets earlier as well. And it is very different for the vines to get ripe at the beginning of September, mid-September, anytime in September, or to get ripe in October. From September 21st, the nights are longer than the days, and the days become cooler. The sun does not go so high, stays lower, so the light is completely different. So the last part of the ripeness comes too quickly, because now it comes when the days are still very long and warm. But the hanging time, especially for a variety like Sangiovese, is extremely important, because Sangiovese is a grape which has a quite vibrant acidity, which we like, but vibrant acidity could be too much sometimes. Is a tannic variety with tannins which tend to be could be quite green, aggressive, and the combination of high acidity and aggressive tannins makes the wine, to me, so difficult to drink. But the beauty of Chianti is the drinkability, is the wine to go with food and easy to match with different food. So it is extremely important not to rush for the harvest, to give time to the grapes and to harvest as late as possible. But there's the sugar. The sugar goes too fast now. So what we are doing now is trying to work on the canopy, on the ratio between the leaves of different age, because all the leaves produce less sugar. So we are pulling out the leaves. We are doing a lot of fine-tuned work, which is difficult. We will need a lot of people, very experienced, so it is difficult. But the big challenge we have is higher alcohol in a time when the market is very happy with a little lighter alcohol in wine. We are working on it.
Luca, let's talk about the workability of the grapes. Obviously, you're working with Nebbiolo while your father's working with Sangiovese. Do you find that there's a big difference in terms of working on them?
If Paolo, my father, was not here listening, I would say yes, of course. I mean, Sangiovese is a grape like any other, and Nebbiolo is a mind state. So somehow there is no question about it.
Wait a minute. I love Nebbiolo, and the project has been a dream for me. So I'm so happy what you say.
Truth to be told, I have started my vinification with full responsibility here in the Sona. So I have much more knowledge about what Nebbiolo is than what Sangiovese is. But of course, me and Paolo, we discuss a lot. He's my consultant, so somehow I can share a lot of ideas with him. Apparently, I think that they are very similar in a way. They are anyhow the two greatest red varieties of Italy. So somehow they are both suitable for long aging wines, both very good in tannins. Well, Sangiovese has much more color, much easy to stick on the color of the grape, while Nebbiolo is much more easy to oxidize, maybe a bit more like Pinot Noir, maybe. Sangiovese, I think, for what I can see with Paolo, it's probably easier in the winery, but a bit more difficult to get quality in the vineyards. While Nebbiolo is the opposite, I would say. Nebbiolo, if you do a proper work in the vineyards, Nebbiolo will reward you with great quality grapes. Then it's quite easy to spoil everything in the winery with Nebbiolo. Again, very easy to oxidize. And Nebbiolo has a very unique, this might be quite technical, but I think it's very interesting to understand the wine, has a very unique tannins to anthocyans ratio. I mean, there is much more tannins versus the color compounds than in any other variety, which makes so that somehow tannins tend to polymerize one-on-one without the intervention of other chemical compounds, which usually is color. And so somehow the wine usually is much more difficult to keep stable. This is what I would say in a very simple way. I don't know. again, it's very rewarding in the vineyards. So this is more than enough, I think. Paolo, what's your idea about the differences?
I think that Sangiovese, it is somehow easier in the vineyards because there is less growth until a few weeks before the harvest.
Okay.
Sangiovese, you do what has to be done, and still you are never safe with the result. It's probably not only a problem of Sangiovese, it's probably also a problem of soil. So sometimes, Luca, I'm not sure whether it is only Nebbiolo that it is so rewarding. You have to work more than we do, but you are safer in getting the result of what you do. But is it because of the soil of Northern Piemonte, which is so healthy, so well drained, there is no clay? Is it the same in the Langhe? You have worked in the Langhe, you know more than I do. But sometimes I feel that it is, as it is always in viticulture, a combination of the problems of the variety and the problems of the soil. And the soil in Northern Piemonte, in Lessona in particular, is such a nice soil because it is healthy. The vines never die. They make a lot of roots and they go deep. And so they do not, the vintage variation is much smaller, from my experience, in the north of Piemonte than we have here in Tuscany, because the roots go deep and they don't care so much about what happens in the surface. Sangiovese, you have the most beautiful grapes 2 weeks before the harvest, and then you get 3 days of heavy rains, and your quality drops down a lot because Sangiovese picks up water like this. I agree in vinification. They are not the problems of Nebbiolo. Nebbiolo is really challenging. The master of vinification, the people who make Nebbiolo of your quality. I admire what you do at Sperino. Sangiovese, when I think of other Sangioveses, I don't want to judge. You have to resist the idea of getting the most possible from the grapes, because it is so easy to over extract and to make something which hides the balance and the finesse and the freshness because of those complicated tannins. The tannins of Nebbiolo, they fill the mouth. The tannins of Sangiovese tends to grip on the tongue.
Sorry. No, I was just going back to the viticultural differences. That's if you go and visit, probably most of you have been to Langhe and hopefully to Alto Piemonte sooner or later, you will always see that Nebbiolo vineyards are perfectly kept. Every shoot is perfectly trained up and leaves are perfectly taken care of, and the result always the good leaf to grapes ratio, etc., etc. But the reason is very simple. If you don't do the proper things to Nebbiolo, you don't have grapes. It's a very, very somehow sophisticated grape variety. I mean, if you don't do your work properly, you don't have any fruits. It's very strange, but this forces people to make great viticulture. I think the average of hand labor hours per hectare in the vineyards in Italy, it's something around 120 hours per hectare a year. The average in Nebbiolo vineyards is 800 hand labor hours per hectare per year. So that's a huge difference. Usually, in average, a Nebbiolo vineyard requires 6 times more work from backbreaking to harvest, which is crazy probably. But again, then you have amazing grapes.
So Paolo, one wine that I love dearly, and actually I think it's one of the most hard wines to get your hands on, is your Chardonnay. So tell us about you planting your vineyards, your Chardonnay vineyards, and and tell me more about it, because I know so many people, if they've had the chance to try it, they're lucky. If they haven't, I know they're going to start searching for it.
Look, Adam, has been a surprise for me as well. It's ironic. I did not plant a Chardonnay in order to make a Chardonnay, so I've been really surprised by the quality. We have to go back to the problems I was mentioning before. The excess of white grapes in the appellation Chianti Classico in the 70s. When I step on the estate with the responsibility, first thing was to harvest a part of the white grapes separate, really with the purpose of making a better bread. But I had these white grapes. We were not in the financial position to replant or to do anything. So I used to make an extremely simple white wine from Malvasia and Trebbiano in a winery which was even more simple than the grapes. We had no temperature control. And that white wine was mostly sold to a distillery, just to get rid of. Then I worked with Sangiovese. I decided to bottle Ceparello, and the finance of the estate was slow in coming better. And finally, in the early 80s, I thought, wow, such a pity to produce in this area, to run the vineyards, and then to sell to the distillery. What should we do for the whites? And without much experience, much experimentation, I want to say, I decided to graft Chardonnay and to use it as a blending variety to give a little more complexity, a little more intensity to the Malvasia Trebbiano blend. So I did it. And in the early 80s, until 1987, I was bottling a white wine, which was 1/3 Malvasia, 1/3 Trebbiano, 1/3 Chardonnay. And I was selling it. And I was happy. I solved the problem in a simple way. And finally, 87 was a cold year. And we first harvested Chardonnay, and I was surprised by the quality, by the grapes, by the aromatics, by the acidity. And I thought it was a pity to blend with Malvasia and Trebbiano, and I decided to keep it separate. And then after the fermentation, I put it in barrels. I know now I would never do barrel after fermentation, but that's what I did. It was a fairly interesting result. And I decided to bottle. And it was the first vintage, 1987. First vintage I bottled and sold Chardonnay from Chianti. By the way, the same year, what did I do with Malvasia and Trebbiano? I increased the production of Vinsanto, another wine which I really like, was produced in very, very tiny quantity for the use of the estate. Gifts, welcome to people, and it became a production of the estate, which I'm very, very satisfied. We are known for Vinsanto.
We have a question from somebody that's watching, and I love it. It's why is the Vinsanto the best, and what makes it so damn good?
It is the best because it's from Isole and Olena, which is a paradise in North, and in paradise are the saints. So I don't know. Thank you so much. Thank you. I could say, but it's a little overstated because I really make it with a passion. Because having wine as my profession, and I love my profession, but Vinsanto is a wine which happens. So a person who has winemaking as the profession, and he has a wine which happens by itself. We dry the grapes, then we press in February. We put in small barrels, not full. We seal the barrels with wax, and we forget it for 9 or 10 years. When we open, Vinsanto is there. It's almost there. The key in my Vinsanto, I think, is having in my mind, the balance I want from my Vinsanto. I taste it for balance. So the key is the blend. And when I blend my Vinsanto, I have all the samples from the small barrels. It's less than half the size of a wine barrel. And now I learned, and I'm very fast. Sometimes you have to look the problem from the other side. I call it the dark side of the moon, and you discover the way how to solve a problem, rather than trying to come out with a blend which makes sense by adding things.
Yeah.
I reverse the problem by pulling out. So what I do, I have all my samples. I very quickly taste for only 4 things: oxidation, more or less oxidation, sugar, so sweeter or drier, alcohol, and volatile acidity, vinegar, because volatile in Misante is always fairly high. And I separate in groups. Then I make a sample with blending all what I have, and I taste it. It never has the balance I want, but it is the wine telling me what makes it unbalanced. So it is always either too oxidative, too strong in alcohol, too sweet, or not enough sweet, not sweet enough, or you feel the volatile. So you pull out. A little adjustment. Now, a little experience. I know that if it is too sweet and I pull out a sample of sweet barrels and don't use, then I have to pull out of the blend a little bit of the higher volatile, because less sugar, the volatile will stand up. And I adjust, and then it's the beauty. Thank you for the comment. I really love Santo.
One thing I wanted to ask you about too, last weekend we had Renzo Cottarella on, and we had an interesting conversation with him about what you just touched on too, with climate change, Sangiovese actually controlling the brick levels and more ripeness in it. Do you think at any point there will be a bit of a return to people wanting to use more white varietals in Chianti Classico?
Yes, definitely. I'm sure that it was too quick to form an excess of white grapes, to say 0 white grapes, as it is the appellation now. In some vintage, a touch of white grapes would help the problem. You know what? People listening would jump on the chair. In 2011, my Ceparello, which is the best Sangiovese on the estate, has a little bit of Trebbiano in it, because I started the fermentation of the first vat. I go on my nose, I go on the top, the fermentation starts. Oh gosh, this is not Ceparello. This is, so I called, in fact, our association was a little people sometimes would kill me, but I asked the director, are we going to change the appellation name? No, why? What's the idea now? Well, you come always with strange ideas. Well, no, I have a proposal. 2011 could be called Chianti Amarone. As an alternative, we could call it Chianti Port. Yeah, still blank, put the phone down. But I didn't want to make a Chianti Amarone or a Chianti Port. So I harvested like a 5%, or not even that, of Trebbiano. And the next vat was jumping up as freshness. Ripeness, because it was a warm vintage, but freshness. Yes, I think a little bit of white grapes, certainly not 30%, but it might help.
You use Canaiolo, a certain percentage of Canaiolo in your Chianti Classico, right?
In my Chianti Classico vintage, yes.
Why Canaiolo? What do you like about it?
And I'm doing since a few years. I'm doing for Canaiolo what I did long ago for Sangiovese. So in my Massal, clonal, and Massal selection again. Well, more than one reason. One reason is a local variety. So there must be a reason for it. Because centuries of producers and winners have selected things, and we have to understand from the past why. And then it's not always necessarily something good, but at least we must be interested in why. I think for a Chianti vintage, Canaiolo is what really gives the Chianti drinkability, beauty and drinkability. Canaiolo has a softer acidity than Sangiovese and softer tannins, very nice spicy aromatics. The problem with Canaiolo has been selected even less than Sangiovese. So most producers really abandon it. They have abandoned in favor of not local varieties. A lot of Chianti is blended with Merlot, with other varieties. Personally, I used in the 80s, I crafted Syrah. Again, like for blending, not for making a Syrah. When the Bordeaux varieties started to be quite fashionable in a blend in Chianti, I thought I wanted to have a variety which could blend with more respect of Sangiovese, and I think Syrah is a very good blend. But I decided, you know, what we do, there must always be a solution for a short term in a view of a long term. So the French varieties, I think there have been very, very good solutions in a short term, because we get immediately a result, because the genetical work has been done by somebody else. We just have to check if they are adaptable to our conditions. But the real long-term solution is to work improving our local varieties. And now I know that Canaiolo could be extremely good, is unique. It is much less widely planted than Sangiovese. You have Sangiovese in almost every single region of Italy. Canaiolo is not only Tuscan, but is very specific of Chianti, in fact. And I think it is worth trying. And I know that I will have good material. There's Canaiolo, which has clusters like this, big berries, almost pink. And we have Canaiolo, which have a small but a loose cluster with a red stem and berries, which are like a blueberry. And there's such a difference. And the results will come soon. So it's a matter of keeping working. Sorry.
So, Paolo, you have revolutionized Chianti Classico as we know it today. What have, can you tell us about the innovations you used over the last few decades and the others that are following in your footsteps?
Thank you. I never wanted to say, now I'm getting aged. I look backward and I say, wow, I've been brave. I tap on my shoulders. No, 2 minutes of rewarding. Well, the conversation today, working for Sangiovese. My selection have been registered by a nursery who is delivering to many, many producers in Chianti Classico. They are using my selections along with other ones. So the work I did for Sangiovese, I think, has been important for the region. The work and understanding the higher density vineyards. In the late 80s, during the 90s, there was a project called the Chianti Classico 2000. Isole and Olena was in the original estates, and what the university and the association gave to me was the control of the effect of the density of plantation, because I was already planting at a higher density. So that we had a vineyard which was planted on 2,500, 5,000, 7,500 and 10,000 wines per hectare. This was another good contribution. We did an extremely interesting work on the east. And this is, things become a little longer. What time is it? And, there have been scientific works on papers, on magazines, on a study which originated at Isole and Olena on a local strain of yeast, and has been proved here that are the social insects like hornets in particular, but bees, wasps, who maintain the quality yeast from year to year, from fermentation to fermentation. Because when there's not an active fermentation around, it's very difficult to find the good Saccharomyces in nature. When I was at university, the idea was very confused. It was in the cellar, from the walls, in the air. yeast do not fly. On the walls of the cellar, you get probably Brettanomyces. That's the reason we have to be clean. But good active Saccharomyces was a kind of a mystery. And with the University of Florence and the entomologist, we demonstrated that the hornets get the good strain of yeast in their intestine. They spend winter as larvae, and in the intestine of the larvae, they are the same strain of yeast which we have in a specific vineyard. So this is, well, for the science, they went on studying the DNA and looking for a specific Italian evolution chain for yeast. And in fact, there is an island in Tuscany which no people is a protected national park, which is called the Monte Cristo. And there they found yeast which are completely different from French strains and other things. Anyhow, this is DNA and science is going on. But what was extremely interesting to me was the fact that a single vineyard is not only the grapes and the combination of the grapes and the climate, but the flora around it and all the life around it. And so the yeast seems to be very specific of the place. So there is a family. We did wine from one vineyard that we have, which is surrounded by 100 hectares of forest, with the protocol decided by the university, and with natural yeast, of course, as we always use. And they selected the yeast, and they maintained it. And I think now they have given the rights to one of the big multinational companies for yeast. Anyhow, my friend at the university left, went to Harvard, he specialized really in the DNA of yeast, and came back to Tuscany 10 years later. I asked him, I want to make the same vinification from the same vineyard, and I want to see if the yeast if I made my wine are of the same, somehow connected in a family line with the yeast 10 years ago. 10 years in yeast means probably millions of generations. And the result was yes. And this is amazing. So to me, it's really, for me personally, in the idea I have of wine, this makes a kind of an holistic result. So.
That's amazing.
And just as we begin to wrap up, Luca, many people, and I've received the explanation from Paolo, especially last year at the winery. Tell us about the difference between Lessona and Uvaggio.
I couldn't hear you very well. The difference in between?
Tell us about the difference between Lessona and Uvaggio.
Okay. Yes. Sorry. Well, Lessona, both are Nebbiolo based. Actually, historically, it was Spanna here in the area. So Nebbiolo is a big family of different biotypes. So the local Nebbiolo is a biotype which is called Spanna, slightly different from the one that you would have in southern Piemonte. And usually in Piemonte, when you had the name of the village on the label, like Lessona, or might be Barolo, might be Gattinara, or whatever, usually you are going to drink a pure Nebbiolo. Because what you're actually saying when you say Lessona or Barolo is Nebbiolo from Barolo, Nebbiolo from Lessona. So then is the village, because Nebbiolo is so much reactive to it's so site specific that somehow the most important is where it's grown. So that's why the different villages would deliver very different wines. Uvaggio was the blend. Uvaggio means a blend in Italy. So that was the very simple common name of the wine that was Nebbiolo plus local grapes that would help Nebbiolo to be a bit more drinkable in its youth. One of the big problems, let's say, that they had in the past with Nebbiolo was that the wine made out of pure Nebbiolo was always taking forever to be drinkable. So very long aging in the barrel, very long aging then in the bottle. And somehow it was so long to obtain that it was bottled really for very special happenings. So it was really a wine that was kept in a very special place in your private cellar. But the everyday wine would be the Uvaggio. Maybe in southern Piemonte, they would blend Nebbiolo and Barbera. They would blend maybe Tresa with Nebbiolo, whatever. Here in alto-piedmont, we have our local grapes. Very unique is Vespolina, which is a very closely related to Nebbiolo, cousin probably. Very interesting. It's spices, very lively in the acidity, so very good to blend and have a young version of Nebbiolo. And then you have several other local grapes, which are Croatina, Bonarda. All of them would help Nebbiolo in its youth, so that the wine would be more approachable. So this is, on the other hand, I would say that the vineyards we harvest are more or less the same. So the same, we take care of the vineyards the same way. Fermentation is the same. Both is natural fermentation in open vats, wooden vats. Some aging in big barrel also for the Uvaggio. So I would say that it's all still a wine that you could age, but definitely a bit easier in its use.
Luca.
Yeah.
You are working with the university with a couple of very old varieties, which I'm so curious to see the results. Can you tell us something about that? Because it might give us something, even a different accent to Uvaggio in the future. Huh?
Yes, well, I guess you all heard about how much research work Paolo has done, that I felt I had to do more or less the same here. So we've done a lot.
No pressure.
Little competition. But that's good. I love it.
Well, I'm very proud of we went through more or less the same selection process that Paolo did in Tuscany for Sangiovese. We did the same here with Nebbiolo, because as I was saying, the local biotype Spanna was considered a synonym here. So Nebbiolo was Miquet, Lampia, Chiavenasca, whatever, but Spanna was just a synonym. And I thought that's not possible, because it's such an old area that it must have its own Nebbiolo. So I started with the University of Turin research. We went into the old abandoned vineyards in the forest. We took shoots of the surviving vines, etc. And we have started exactly the same procedure that Paolo has explained before. So we have planted a vineyard, then started to multiply, doing analysis, checking the wines, and finally, that was 3 years ago, the Minister of Agriculture has certified the first 9 clones of Spanna coming from our vineyards, which are now available to everybody. So now it's officially a biotype Spanna. So you have Miquet, you have Lampia, you have Picotendro, you have Chiavenasca, and Spanna, and that's I'm very proud of it. And then, yes, we started with a bunch of very, very small varieties. We had Slarina, which was just one vine surviving, probably 120 years old vine that we found. We are very lucky here because the ampelography, maybe in English, I don't know, yeah, school of Italy has started here in Vienna. The Rovasenda, the Count of Rovasenda, was the first Italian ampelographer. And so still today, that's very big here. And in Biella, so the city nearby Lessona, we have Anna Schneider. That's the, I would say, most famous Italian ampelographer living today. And so she was helping a lot. So in a very old vineyard, we found that single vine of Slarina, which we have tried and multiplied, but we still have no idea of how the wine will be. We have Negrera going on, so we have a bunch of it. I agree with Paolo when he says that because it's local must be good, but sometimes I think that if it was abandoned, maybe there is a reason. So I don't know. So I don't think that everything that we are selecting will be helpful, but first of all, knowledge makes human being to improve. So it's done also because of the love for knowledge. And second, we were talking about global warming. We are living today a situation that we have no idea where will lead us. And so why do we as beginners, we try to do this kind of researches? Because we don't know what we will need in the future. We have to face a time that maybe Nebbiolo will not possible to be grown here. It was very, I will try to be short because I think it's late maybe, but it was very interesting what has happened about a year ago in Bordeaux about global warming. You heard that they have changed, not for the Classé, of course, but they have changed the varieties you could grow, right? You can grow now Tempranillo or whatever. So it's, so how can you face global warming? There are probably two totally opposite ways to face it. One is to change the varieties you grow. So what Bordeaux said was, Bordeaux is great because it's made here, no matter what grapes you use. The Italian way, usually, the Nebbiolo, let's say, would be, Nebbiolo is great because it's Nebbiolo. If we cannot grow it here, we move north, and we are north. So that's why also there is a lot of interest in alto-piedmont from producers from the Langhe, because they're trying to move north in order to avoid this climate warming. But still, we don't know what will happen in the future. So we might need this variety we are trying to save. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Makes no sense, but it's, I think.
Well, it's amazing work that you're doing. It's very, very cool. I feel like I could ask you about 100 more questions, but with that being said, we'll probably wrap it up. The one thing I just wanted to mention as well is on helpernwine.com, we do have a number of the wines available for sale if anybody is interested. We have just recently received the 2016 Chianti Classico, which is very exciting. So that is now available here for sale. And there's a small amount of both the Uvaggio and Rosé, and we have more Lessona en route that we're taking reservations for as well. So there's a number of wines if you visit our website. But thank you both so much for joining. It's so wonderful to see you. I wish it was in person, but we'll make this work for now.
Well, thank you.
It will happen. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Adam. And when will be possible to move? All the people who listened, I hope they will have the opportunity to visit my son, because northern Piemonte is so fascinating, and of course Tuscany is beautiful. So they will be extremely welcome.
It's a very small estate, so hopefully there is not that much people listening to it.
not all at the same time. Eh?
Yeah,
not all at the same time.
We can't wait to get back there. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Paolo, Luca, thank you so much. A couple things before I say goodbye to you guys is, once again, as Sheila mentioned, you can, if you have a salesperson with us, feel free to contact them, or you can visit helpernwine.com. We are offering free contactless delivery in the GTA. We do ship outside of the GTA, but obviously there is a little fee. So go to Helper Wine, see what there is. I know there's a few cases of Isole Chardonnay left, as I mentioned, so you can go take a look at that. Just talking about next week. Next week, our time is changing. Next Friday, instead of Saturday, we're doing next Friday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern. We have a few special guests, one being Chef Daniel Baloud, as well as from Artemis Domain, Frederic Angerer, who will be bringing along his friends from Chateau Gruyere, Domaine de Eugenie, Clos-de-Tar, Isley Vineyard, and of course, Chateau Latour. So next Friday, April 24th at 11:30 a.m. I please everyone who's watching, and Luca, Paolo, and of course, Sheila, please stay safe. I hope once again everyone can join us for our next episodes. This is going to be on YouTube. If you have any friends or family who didn't get a chance, But we hope everyone stays well. Enjoy a glass of wine. Enjoy your family. And we hope to see you all soon. Luca, Paolo, thank you guys again for joining us.
So thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Stay
Thank
safe.
you, Sheila.
Thank
Ciao.
you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you, Luca.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.